Have today Mrs. Nana Ananieje, our General Secretary. She's going to take us through dealing with workplace conflicts. So please, if you're not talking, please mute your device. Please, let's turn off our videos. If you have any questions or comments, kindly post them in the chats and you'll be attended to. Okay, so without further ado, I welcome Mrs. Nana Ananieje to take us through our CPD for today. Nana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanam. And thanks to everyone for joining us. So today we are going to be talking about dealing with workplace conflict. And I have to issue a disclaimer before we start that it doesn't mean that I do not engage in conflict myself. Conflict is part of life. So I am not playing an advisory role today. We are here to learn and brainstorm and see how best we can make our workplaces more cordial and productive for us. So the objectives for today, I hope that at the end of the session, we will realize the impact of conflict, and then we'll be able to define some constructive and destructive conflict behaviors. So we'll look at what these conflict behaviors are and have time to reflect on which of them we exhibit, because we all have some constructive and some destructive conflict behaviors. And then to develop some of the useful strategies that can help us. There are a lot of strategies for managing conflict, and I have a lot of slides, but we will see where time takes us today. We will try to end by 6 as planned, but let's see how it goes today. So I'm going to start by sharing a video, and I hope the sound is going to play. So let me stop sharing this and try again. Can you hear the sound, please?
Yes, we can hear the sound.
Okay, that's great.
But we can't see the video.
Sorry, can you see it now? Okay, let me stop. Okay. Sorry, usually it's best to test these things, but our time is far gone. So it was just an icebreaker video for us to see how easy it is to get into conflict. So let's go on and then move into the session. So some key definitions for us today. The first one is conflict, for us to understand what the word conflict means. And it's simply any situation in which people have apparently incompatible goals. So the word apparently is there because that is how it appears to either or both parties. It is not always the case that there are incompatible goals, or there are incompatible interests, or there are incompatible principles or feelings, but sometimes it is just a miscommunication or a misunderstanding. So conflict may be related to tasks. So people who have tasks that are interdependent. So if someone's role feeds into your role, if you are in the field and someone has to collect data for you to be able to analyze, you may have some task-related conflicts. And it may also be person-related, because we have different temperaments, we have different emotional intelligence levels, and we will look a bit at what emotional intelligence is. And then we will understand some of the reasons why conflict sometimes is apparent. Conflict management, on the other hand, is the ways in which we try to deal with conflict. So the use of different processes, different tools, different skills to find creative and respectful ways to manage disagreements and disputes. So it includes several things, such as our communication skills, which includes active listening and being able to speak assertively enough. And then our ability to be able to collaborate with other people to resolve conflict. So at this point, I would like us to go into some breakout rooms. We shared the worksheet for today's session, and the worksheet has the exercises that we are going to do today. We will try to go through all of them. So the first exercise, we are going to do that in groups. So we are going to have 5 breakout rooms, and we'll be automatically assigned into these breakout rooms. And what we are doing in each of these breakout rooms is to discuss some of the sources of conflict. So how does conflict come about? It could be with your co-workers, it could be with your bosses, even your family members, conflict in the community. So as a group, we are about 80 here. So about at least 12 people in a group. Just come up with 1 or 2 sources of conflict, and then write how it comes about, and then some of the costs. So what are the impacts of those conflicts? So if it's a co-worker or a colleague conflicts, what are some of the costs? If it's a family conflict, what are some of the costs? And please pick 1 rep to report your answers when we come back. So we have 7 minutes to do that discussion, about 2 minutes to settle into the room, and 5 minutes to do the discussion. So please let's volunteer, someone in each room volunteer to lead the session and present on behalf of your team. I hope it's clear. Okay.
Yes, please.
Silence means consent. Thank you. So please join a room when you get the prompt. And we'll come back into the main session at 4:38. Room 1, please, have we started? Do we have someone leading the discussion? Hello? Audi Mensa, Audi Maxwell, Wejiwa. Everyone is quiet here. Please, can you hear me? Hello? Breakout room 1. Audi Dede.
Buddy.
Your
How
room
are
is
you, Nana?
silent. Thank you. Please. No, you can unmute, please. Please unmute and start the discussion. We have just 5 minutes. Thank you. Audi Dede, can you please coordinate for this room? Oh, I think she left. Audi Maxwell. Welcome. Please, for those of us still in the main session, we have breakout rooms going on. So when you come here, please join one. Thank you. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope we were able to come up with some answers. So can we have the rep for breakout room 1 share something? It was very quiet when I visited. I hope you were able to do something.
Okay, hello, good afternoon, everyone. I might have some feedback, but I don't have any option.
Please go ahead. Please try to share in 2 to 3 minutes.
Okay, so for us, we didn't start early, but what we gathered was the first one was misunderstanding. Misunderstanding where communication has gone wrong, and how it starts is the information being received at the other end. When someone communicates, how the other person receives it, the style of communication. Yes. That's how misunderstanding can start. And then the direct cost is that the personal relationship between the individuals are mad. It affects work relationship, and it can go indirectly to affect the goals of the organization or the goals of the department or whichever institution you are working with. And then we also have insubordination. Insubordination and how it starts is familiarity. For some people, because of familiarity, then they tend to be insubordinate to their bosses or their leaders. And it also goes a long way to mar the personal relationships and also the goals or the vision and mission of the institution or the organization. And then there is also another one that is about threats. That one was given by Auntie Hamda. She can explain better. So if you can take it up from there.
Okay.
So the threat to one's status, that's also threat to one's status, be it at the work site or even at home, where you are a leader and you have assigned some roles to your lower or your colleagues, your subordinates. And the subordinates does the work so well that now it is the 2IC, that is the second in command. This is soldier English. That is now recognized. So when that happened, you realize that the boss wouldn't be too comfortable. Sometimes it happens. The boss feels that maybe you are trying to take his or her position. And this can actually affect even your personal relationship, and then go ahead to affect the institutional goal attainment. Because if there's a task that your boss knows that you can do it very well, you say, this is going to take my shine. Why not give it to someone who will just say, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. So that is one of them. Okay. And then finally, we also have personal differences. So the personal differences, it comes in so many ways. When you look at our cultural backgrounds, when you look at the way we are brought up in our various homes, families. So let me use this example. Like a person, I'm from the north, so I'm going to use the north as an example. And when we speak, you speak so loud, and without knowing that your loudness will cause any irritation or anything. Sometimes the loudness, the other person might think you are being rude or you want to overload. Yeah. But that is your nature. That is how you've been brought up. Okay. So sometimes the personal differences also affect it. And when that happens, again, communication between you and your other colleagues, you say, oh, this person, as for her,
Like shouting.
she always wants to be bossy. She feels she knows too much. But that is not it. That is the person, that is the individual differences. And in institutions or in organizations, we are all from different backgrounds. And these are some of the things that we need to look at. So because as a result of this, the direct relationship, the personal relationship will be affected. So you will not have that family-like relationship within the institution. Okay. And this again will go ahead to affect the goal attainment of the institution.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Group 1. So from what you have told us so far, most of the conflicts are work related, but they are also personal as well, things that have to do with personal differences and familiarity and misunderstanding. And the effects can also be on people, so straining relationships and then affecting goals. Thank you. That was awesome. Can we have room 2?
Okay, I feel like Group 1 was eavesdropping on us. Okay, so Group 2, we also came up with some of the sources of conflicts. The first one was different personality traits, like they also mentioned. So we have different people with different temperaments and different traits. And when they come together in one space, there's always one person's temperament rubbing off on the other. And that sort of generates some sort of conflict. And we said that this would impact work. If it's in the working environment, it would make some people feel inhibited to maybe contribute when work is being done, and it would in the end affect productivity. We also said that there were some people who have different value systems. I think that Auntie Hamda had made that very clear. I mean, growing up in a certain place, your perceptions of things are different from other people. So when you find yourself in one place, some people may feel judged or looked down upon. And if this is not managed well, it would
sorry, we are losing.
We also be the perception of maybe a senior. Oh, okay. Please, can you hear me?
Okay, yes, it's good. It's good.
It's better. Okay. So I was talking about the workplace when there's a senior most staff and maybe a younger one, and then work is not clearly delegated so that we know who is doing what. There will be some form of conflict when it comes to performing your roles. You may want to do things that you have not been assigned, and it could bring about some bad blood between the people. In the end, this also affects work output, and then even the working environment becomes full of tension. We also spoke about misunderstanding assigned roles. So when you already know what you have to do, but the clarity is not there, it would cause people not to know what to do. Sometimes you would even give an output that is totally not what was expected. And so these are some of the sources of conflict we identified as Room 2. Thank you.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. And I like the fact that you talked about work not being delegated, because we will look at what the concept of hot buttons, and we will see that micromanaging people is one of the hot buttons of a lot of people. So thank you, Group 2. Can we have Room 3?
Yes, please. So Group 3, we named our group the Apple Group, and we looked at the sources of conflict. So we look at sources of conflict among co-workers, and we said that usually it has to do with poor communication, and the poor communication ran through all the groups. The poor communication ran through all the, whether it's with the subordinates or with the boss or in the family. And then we also saw that sometimes if one person is given a task and it's not properly communicated, that could lead to conflict. And then also sometimes when there have been past issues that have not been properly dealt with, it can go ahead and lead to conflict. Now with the boss's own, sometimes the tasks are ambiguous, there's mistrust, there are unresolved past issues, and then sometimes some bosses try to intimidate their subordinates, and all this can lead to conflict. The other thing for family was unrealistic expectations, and then poor communication as well, mistrust. And sometimes when the relationship is not built properly in terms of commitment, so when there's lack of commitment, it can lead to conflict. And then now we also discuss the cost of conflict, saying that it can slow down the entire group, it can limit productivity, and also in the workplace, it can slow progress and prevent professional goals from being achieved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's awesome. Apple group. I like the fact that you talked about unresolved issues, because a lot of the time, and especially in our cultural context in Ghana, issues between colleagues or people or even family members of different age groups a lot of the time goes unresolved, because if you are younger or you are the subordinate, it's expected that you just let it go. But people are not able to easily let things go as we expect them to, and that can lead to a whole cycle of conflict, and then little things that can just be glossed over become huge fights. And you also talked about lack of commitment, which is a very important thing. So thank you. Can we have room 4, please?
Yes, please. So room 4, we looked at some of the sources of conflict. So I think the first one we came up with is cultural differences. Cultural differences in the sense that people have already established ideas of their colleagues, maybe because of stuff they've already heard about a particular tribe. So already at the workplace, they have a sense of energy they will attach to them. So sometimes it happens that mostly they don't agree on issues. They tend to not agree on issues all the time because the other person has already an established angle coming from. And with that, people are not able to work very well, which in turn affects productivity most of the time. And then the other one we also looked at was generational gap. Generational gap. Someone is 30 years, someone is 25, another is 35. And these two have to work on a task at work. And the other feels like, oh, okay, this is how this is how we are supposed to look at it. This other person feels like, in our age, this is what we do, or this is how appropriately it should be done.
Yes.
So when it happens like that, if these two are not able to find a middle ground, they tend to fight almost all the time. And then the younger ones are mostly not able to cope. So it's always conflict. And then, yeah, there's a bad mood at work. And then definitely, if the younger one has an idea to support the project or something going on, the younger one may not even contribute at all. And yeah, so I think those are our main points we discussed in the group.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Can we have the final room 5?
Yeah, thank you very much. With room 5, we identified 2 areas of conflict, and we looked at the office and the family. So with the office, we saw 3 sources of conflict, one coming from lack of boundaries. Now, this is where it is unclear who is responsible for what task, assuming the dietitian A is doing something that is entering the task of dietitian B or nutritionist A, it can cause conflict. Then the second thing we looked at under the office was the inability to work as a team. Now, this can come up when there is communication problems. Anytime a decision is to be arrived at, because of the communication barrier, it becomes impossible to work as a team. Then the third thing we looked at was the lateness to work. So reporting late to work all the time can bring conflict, because it happens that the person who reports late delays and
Helena.
Accomplishing her task. So someone else has to, family. We saw that with the family, finances can be a source of conflict where there is no clear-cut area to distribute the funds. The father wants the funds to go into, let's say, family project. The mother wants the funds to go into household like the equipment or household food ingredient. So this can cause problems. Or let's say the father wants the children to go to a public school and the mother wants the children to go to a private school. Conflict can arise out of that. And so we looked at the costs of these conflicts. One, there is low output when there is lack of boundaries and inability to work as a team, and then there is always laziness to work. There can be low output. And then the second one is delay in executing the duties. So these two, this low output and then the delay in executing the duties can lead to the company or the organization not achieving its goal. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I like that you talked about lack of boundaries and also things that have to do with work ethics, like lateness to work and managing personal issues like managing finances. And room 4 also highlighted a very important conflict starter, which is cultural differences. So thank you all. And I'm happy every group came up with some of the conflict scenarios. So moving forward, I like that a lot of us talked about things that border around misunderstanding or perceptions or miscommunication, because there are stories all around us, and we have what the concept of the grapevine, even in offices and at workplaces. And stories have a way of creating themselves, and it's a cycle. So it starts by an individual or a group of people who have a commonality. So for example, if for whatever reason, coincidentally, there's a group of people who speak one dialect or are from one part of the country or went to one school, or even gender-wise sometimes, so the women can group together and make an observation. It may or may not be true, but whatever observation they make, they are making from their own lens, and then they select data out of the observation they've made. So they choose what to believe, they choose how to interpret what they are seeing. And then they go on to add meaning. So what they are seeing, what they have selected out of what they are seeing, and then the meaning that they are attributing to it. So for example, person A likes to raise their voice when they shout. So the selective data that they make out of that is that this person just likes to shout and likes to raise their voice for no reason. And then they add meaning to it. He's just a rude person. And they make assumptions about the person. And those assumptions lead to conclusions. So they conclude that this person, for example, this person is difficult to work with, or this person will never change. That's how he has been or she has been, and she's never going to change. And then they adopt beliefs about the person and they keep passing it on. So if that person coincidentally does that action or repeats that action, then it's like, we said it, this person just likes to do that. And that is how things like tribalism and segregation happens. So seeing that one ethnic group likes to do something, or you saw one person from an ethnic group do something, and then you saw another person, and then you adopt that as the belief, and immediately you see a third person doing that. Oh, these people are all like that. So it becomes a feedback loop, and the misconceptions are spread. And that is what influences the actions that people take in certain scenarios. So something that person A may do, and you may forgive or give grace to person A, if person B does it because you have a belief or you've drawn a conclusion about person B, you refuse to let it go. So that is how stories create themselves. So it's important that we start from this first step of observing to make sure that we have a wide lens when we are looking at things, and we will look at some of the ways to do that. So we have talked about conflict. I had a poll, but it looks like it's gone. But if we can have some comments in the chat, do we think conflict is good or bad? Just type it in the chat. If you think it's good, just type good. If you think it's bad, just type bad. And if you are not sure, just type unsure. I just want to have an idea of our perception of conflict. Is conflict good or bad? Okay, so someone says can be both good and bad. That's Lexis. Justine says it's good when we're well managed. Some level of conflict is good, both. Okay, that's good. That's good. So we all definitely agree that conflict is not an entirely bad thing, and that is true. Because conflict is actually a sign that change is needed. So if you realize that there's a lot of conflict happening within the family or within the organization, then it's a sign that something has to change. There is something that is going on or something that is existing that needs to be changed. Or it could also be a sign that a change is coming. So the way that people are used to doing things might be pivoting, or people might be shifting. So that might lead to conflict, because human beings do not like change. We like to have familiarity. So when change is coming, sometimes it leads to conflict. And sometimes conflict happens after a change. So if the workplace, the work structure or organizational structure or whatever in the office changes, it might lead to conflict, especially if there's like a reshuffling and people are moved around, and the new boss is not necessarily the longest serving member of the staff. Things like that can lead to conflict. So there's something like too much conflict, and too much conflict is bad. And there's something like the right amount of conflict. So too much conflict creates a high stress environment. So a lot of us touched on it, that the workplace becomes hostile and relationships are strained. It leads to high stress. You don't trust people who you are always having conflicts with. Conflict is normal, but if someone for some reason always ends up in conflicts with you, it leads to mistrust. Sometimes you suspect the people of probably not having your interest at heart. And in extreme cases, it might lead to physical confrontations. There's also confusion, especially when you really seek to understand what is going on and you just don't get it. And this can lead to people exhibiting aggressive behavior. So people who are initiating the conflict and those on the receiving end can both be aggressive, because we respond to conflict in different ways. But too little conflict is also not good, because it kills creativity. If everybody is saying yes to the one in charge and everybody is doing as they are told without questioning, then people are not being innovative enough. People are not thinking outside the box. So there's no problem solving. And it leads to a groupthink. A groupthink is where everybody within a group has the same idea. So there might be an inner caucus in an office that always agrees on something in a similar way, or always views things in a similar way. And that is groupthink. And oftentimes it makes people who are outside that caucus feel like they do not belong. Also, people do not discuss. They don't bring things up, because if I'm going to bring something up and it's going to worry people, then I don't want the conflict. So people just stay where they are. On the other hand, people may also not raise any issue at all, pretending that everything is okay when deep down they know that things are not right. And that can lead to passive aggressive behavior. So you are not necessarily fighting the person, but you are making comments. Sometimes it's like you are passing a joke about the person, but you say offensive things. All those things are microaggressions. Or you make slight statements about a person's ethnicity, for example. You don't engage in those microaggressions. And then it also breeds a culture of silence. So a culture of silence where nobody speaks up, nobody challenges anything, and then it leads to mediocrity. Because if we are all going with the flow, then no one is doing or going the extra mile. So that it's important that we have an appropriate level of conflict, a good balance, which leads to healthy collaboration. Collaboration is not just accepting what the other person is saying because you want to avoid conflict. And we will look at collaboration in detail later on. Appropriate levels of conflict also help enable problem solving. It enables negotiation, it enables involvement and accountability. So people have to be accountable for the work they are doing. And if there's conflict, if they know that someone is going to challenge what they are doing, people will be on their toes and be accountable. It also leads to personal growth, and it helps assertive behavior. So assertive behavior is very important in conflict management because a lot of bottling up leads to conflict, and people should be able to, or we should be able to speak up and be assertive respectfully assertive in our handling of conflicts. So we'll look at a few concepts under conflict dynamics. Conflict dynamics is a concept that assesses the way people deal with conflict. So we'll look at emotional intelligence, and then we'll look at how we respond to conflict, so constructive and destructive behaviors, and then the concept of hot buttons. So emotional intelligence, I'm sure we've heard about it several times in several fora. We have talked about emotional intelligence, but it's particularly important in conflict management because it impacts how we perceive ourselves. So how do we regard ourselves, and how do we get to the point where we feel that sense of self-actualization, so that you are not working for 20 years and you feel like you have achieved nothing because you are looking at others with an eye or with a veil or with a lens that is judgmental. You are not being objective enough to see how far you yourself have come. And also emotional self-awareness. So a lot of people gloss over their emotions. People pretend like they don't have emotions, and we are emotional beings, whether male or female, we all have emotions, and it's important that you are aware of your emotions. So how do your emotions come through? Do you experience outbursts, or do you experience like bouts of crying where you are bawling, or are you someone who just takes things easy? You know, we have to be aware of our emotions and how our emotions show when we are confronted in conflict situations. That's how we'll be able to manage those conflicts efficiently. Emotional intelligence also impacts how we express ourselves. So whether you are going to be assertive or independent is a very important indicator of the level of emotional intelligence that you are. If you understand that you yourself have some emotions and you treat yourself with respect, it is out of that respect for yourself that you can extend to other people and extend that emotional grace to other people. It also helps us to develop relationships, so interpersonal relationships and empathy. Empathy being the understanding of what people are going through, not just feeling sorry for them, but putting yourself in their shoes and understanding their situation and what is going on with them. And it also gives us a sense of social responsibility, so that if something is going wrong in the office, if there's a groupthink, you don't join the group because if you can't beat them, join them, or you want to be part of the numbers. You have a social responsibility to speak up for those who are being oppressed, for want of a better word. And then it also impacts how we make decisions. So our problem solving, do we run away from conflicts? Do we face conflicting situations? Do we speak up when we are confronted, or do we avoid conflict situations entirely? And do we treat people with respect? When something happens, are we able to control our impulses? Or even when we act impulsively, are we able to take a step back and rethink about our actions and try to make it right? And also testing reality, because a lot of the time our expectations are just unreal or unreasonable, and we should be able to make objective decisions by knowing these things. And then lastly, it helps us to manage stress. If you are not flexible and you do not adapt easily, you are constantly going to be stressed, because you are going to be annoyed, you are going to be frustrated about the things that are going on around you, when it is just your perception that is making you see them that way. And being emotionally intelligent also creates a sense of optimism in us. So hot buttons are certain behaviors in people that trigger us. So we all have hot buttons, and there are common hot buttons that trigger a lot of people. A lot of people are triggered by people who are self-centered, so people who are thinking about themselves. If there's a colleague in the office who is always me, myself, and I, thinking about them and not thinking about the group and thinking about how to make the workplace better, it triggers some people. There are also people who are just abrasive, and that is also a trigger for other people. So they are not friendly, they are not cordial, they are disrespectful to their colleagues. That can be a hot button for some people. There are also people who are just not trustworthy. Sometimes because they have exhibited certain behaviors or they have done certain things, they have a reputation for being untrustworthy, or they have proven to you that you cannot trust them. And those things, that trait might trigger you. There are also people who are just hostile. And then people who are aloof, people who are apathetic, people who are not reliable, people who analyze everything. So they are asking questions to the letter T and want to know everything and want to understand everything, even things that are not within their purview, they want to analyze. That can also be a trigger for a lot of people. And then people who are unappreciative, especially if it's someone who is a senior or a boss or a leader or a manager. If people work for you and you're unappreciative, it can be a trigger for them, and they can get into conflict situations with you easily. And then finally, micromanaging. So refusing to delegate. People are working and you want to know every single thing they are doing. You do not allow people to be creative. That can also be a trigger for a lot of people. We all have hot buttons. So you might have 1 or 2 or 3 of these 9 hot buttons. But what is important is that we practice cooling our hot buttons. So if your hot button is micromanaging and you have a boss who micromanages you, that is a task for you. You need to learn to cool your hot buttons, to understand that is this person's deficiency, and you don't just ignore it, but you find a way to talk. So we will look at effective communication as a way of managing conflict. So it's important that we practice cooling our hot buttons. Now we respond to conflicts differently. So a lot of the time, or all the time, there's a precipitating event or a hot button. So someone micromanages you, or someone is untrustworthy. That initiates a conflict situation. Now the decision is left for us to make, whether we want to give a constructive response or a destructive response to that conflict situation. And it can easily go either way, depending on your mood, depending on whether you are hungry or whether you have eaten. It can go either way. So what is important is that we have that presence of mind that this is my hot button. So if I encounter that hot button, I have to make sure that I am producing a constructive response. And a constructive response is cognitive in nature. Cognitive means that you are focusing on the task or the issue. So the what and the why and the where, instead of focusing on the individual. So what happened and why did it happen and how? So those are the things you are focusing on, and you don't make it about the person, because a lot of the time, the hot buttons that are triggering us are also the shortfalls of the other person. So if you focus on the cognitive aspect of the conflict, or the what and the why and the how and the issue itself, then that de-escalates the conflict so that it doesn't go on and on. But if you decide to be focused on your emotions and how the person is making you feel and how you see the person, then that escalates the conflict. And we respond to conflicts in an active or passive way. So within these constructive and destructive conflict behaviors that we have looked at, there are passive and active ways. Overall, there's no, apart from the bottom right corner where there are destructive passive actions. So things like avoiding and yielding. So avoiding means you refuse to work on the conflict. You just let it go because it does not matter to you. Yielding means that you try, and then if you see that it's not going anywhere, you just let it be. And then hiding your emotions. So if something upsets you, it is valid and you are within your rights to show your emotions. It doesn't mean that you should be shouting and throwing tantrums, but let people know how their actions affect you. Because a lot of the time, people repeat offensive actions because we do not speak up and make them know how their actions are affecting us. We hide our emotions, especially in workplace settings. We have this notion that the workplace is not a place to show emotions. But a lot of psychological research is going on to show that even as leaders and as individuals and as professionals, we are emotional beings, and it's important that we embrace our emotions and deal with them rather than hiding them. And then self-criticism. So there are people who, after a conflict, they feel so bad that they go home and they are thinking of all the things they did wrong. So if I hadn't gone to say this, the conflict wouldn't have happened. If I hadn't responded, the conflict wouldn't have happened. But that is not a healthy way of dealing with conflict. Criticizing yourself and always making yourself the victim is not a healthy way. However, there's room for reflective thinking. So you sit down and analyze the conflict and see how objectively you can deal with it. And sometimes also delaying your response to the conflict is important. So in the heat of the fire or in the heat of the argument, you might want to take a step away, take a break or something, and go and cool off and come back to deal with the issue. And then adapting. So are there changes that you can make that would help the conflict to be resolved? So I'd like us to do exercise 2. If you have, I believe we all have the worksheets. So exercise 2 shows us the conflict behaviors. And what I'd like each of us to do is to note your destructive behaviors. So amongst the destructive conflict behaviors, which ones do you exhibit most? And then note your strong constructive behaviors. And then also note your top hot buttons. And the purpose of doing this exercise is that you want to leave here with something that you are going to work on. So where do you want to focus your attention on? Do you feel like your destructive hot buttons are too many and you want to work on reducing them, or you exhibit them too much. Okay, so for example, the distractive response of displaying anger or retaliating may be your issue, and you might want to work on reducing those, or you might want to work on expressing your emotions or reaching out. So that is the essence of this exercise. So please note them on your worksheet, and then after the session, you can do some reflection to know where you want to focus your attention. So we'll go to the second part of the session, which is managing conflicts. And we are going to look at some of the ways to minimize negative conflict. So the actions we take at the very beginning of a conflict often determine the outcome. So when the conflict starts, we need to get it right from the beginning. And relying on constructive behaviors before, during, and after a conflict. So, for example, making reflective thinking a part of your day or your life can help you to avoid some of the conflicts altogether. And these things can transform the experience from one that is filled with tension to one that is positive. So a positive work environment. There are some 5 conflict management strategies, simple strategies that we can use or employ to help us deal with conflicts. So the first one is understanding, then there's communicating, re-engaging, exploring, and contemplating. So we will briefly look at these 5 and what they mean. So to understand, you need to view the situation from a wider angle. So when I talked about how stories are created, I talked about people seeing things from their own lens. We all have our perceptions. We all have our what we have heard or what we have been told over the years. And in a conflict situation, it's important that you look at the conflict from the other person's perspective. You may be upset, you may be disappointed, but why do you think the other person did what they did? And then you evaluate the conflict beyond your own perspective. That's the only way you can move forward. And then after understanding, you want to explore. So create as many viable solutions as possible. So if you have access to the person, you want to go to the person, have a discussion, and come up with ways in which you can deal with the situation. And there should be a collaboration so that the results are meaningful to both parties. So if you sit in your room and decide on your own that this conflict happened between this person and I am going to deal with it this way because I feel that's the best way, that might not be how the person is seeing it, or that might not be the best way forward for the other person. So you want to do your exploration as collaboratively as possible. And then communicate. So communication should be authentic, should be direct, and should be honest. So authentic, be yourself, express how you are feeling, say it directly, respectfully but firmly, and then be honest about how this situation makes you feel. And we will look at how to communicate assertively as we go on. Then you want to re-engage. So you need to admit responsibility for your contribution to the conflict. No conflict is one person's fault. Every conflict has more than one party. So you need to admit your side or your contribution to the conflict, and then try to move the relationship back on track. That is if the relationship is meaningful or it's valuable to you, and work relationships should be valuable to us. So we need to take the bold step to move broken relationships back on track. And then cultivate an optimistic mindset. Don't look forward to the person offending you again, because that's how you get a heightened response to their actions. Just have an optimistic mindset and make an excuse for the person and move on. And then you want to consider the best response to the whole conflict situation. So if you are going back to engage with the person, what are you going to say and how are you going to communicate that? And you need to regain your emotional balance. So if a conflict, a lot of the time, conflicts throw us out of balance. So they either make you upset or they make you sad or they make you angry. And you want to balance and stabilize your emotions as a way of dealing with the conflict, and then encourage flexibility, both for yourself and for the other person, and change where change is due. Apart from this 5-step process, there's also the collaborative problem-solving process, which is a tool that helps us to address potential conflicts or existing conflicts. So this is a 9-step model that you can use to deal with the conflicts. And the problem-solving process is quite impressive because it separates the person from the problem. So you are looking at the problem itself, regardless of who the problem is related to. And it encourages open dialogue. And as much as possible, it tries to create a win and then protects the relationship on both sides. So the first part, which has the first 2 steps, is to air all your viewpoints. So that you want to start by listening actively and intentionally as the other person speaks. Then you want to summarize their ideas shared and acknowledge any emotions they have expressed in your own words. And we will look at how to do this. Is mirroring their feelings. So you want to listen to them actively and then relay what you think you heard them say back to them. Then you share how the conflict affects you through an I message. So we will also look at the I messages, but here is an example. It says, I feel frustrated when you don't respond to my email because what I have to say is important. This is different from going to a colleague and saying, I always send you emails and you do not reply. The person might have reasons for not replying, but you are communicating to them how their failure to respond to your email makes you feel and why it makes you feel that way. It is not just because you want to feel frustrated, but it's because you have something important to tell them. And if it was not that important, you would not be emailing them in the first place. And then you move on to clarifying the problem. So after you have shared, you have listened to them and mirrored how they feel, and you have shared how you feel about the situation, you want to clarify what the problem itself is. So you ask questions to identify and clarify each side's interests and needs. So asking them what they want or what they need to be changed. And then you combine both sides' needs into a joint issue in neutral terms. So if you have an argument with someone in the office because they said something and you did not understand, the issue will be breakdown in communication. It will not be that Mr. A likes to shout, or Mr. A is always saying the wrong things, or Mr. A does not talk to me nicely, or Mr. A never communicates tasks well. As neutral as possible. So breakdown in communication, or lack of internet connectivity or something. If someone needs internet to work on a task for you to pick up and they don't have it and it leads to a conflict, it is not a problem with their person, it is a problem with the resource. So you want to be neutral in defining the issue. Then you now brainstorm solutions. So you generate a list of possible solutions to the problem, and then you eliminate weak ones. So weak ones, as in the ones that are probably just surface solutions that might lead to a breakdown in communication again eventually. And then you test out what is left. So what you have agreed on, is it realistic? And does it satisfy the underlying need? Is it going to solve the issue that you have identified? Then finally, you develop an agreement. So you reach an agreement on the best solution from the list that you have made. And then you specify the details so that everybody is clear on what they have to do. So we'll look at a third concept, which talks about our conflict resolution styles. So we respond to conflicts differently. And we have the constructive and destructive responses. But there are also resolution styles, which are the ways we decide to deal with the conflict. So you might respond to a conflict and leave it hanging. But when it comes to resolving or making moves to resolve the conflict, it is based on two things. The first one is the importance of the relationship in question to you as a person. And then the importance of the goal in question, because every conflict has a goal. So if you are fighting over office space, the office space is the goal. But the relationship is probably the relationship between you and your colleague whom you came into the office on the same day with, or could be between you and your boss. So based on these two things, the relationship and the goal, we may avoid conflicts, we may accommodate conflicts, we may compromise on a conflict, we may collaborate with people on a conflict, and we might compete or be competitive. So accommodation means giving up what you want in order to let the other person get what they want. And it's putting aside your own needs and concerns in order to satisfy the needs of the other person. So in an accommodation situation, you will say that I satisfy your concerns at my expense. So I let it go. Although I am not happy, although it's inconveniencing to me, I want you to have what you want, so I am going to let it go. And we use accommodation when the relationships are more important than the outcome. So if you value the relationship with your colleague over the comfort you will get in that office space, you are going to let them have the office space just so that you can have peace. But that is only when you value the relationship more than the goal. And also when sometimes we want to reach a quick temporary solution. So you just want the conflict to be resolved as quickly as possible so that you can move on to work on a project, for example. Or perhaps you realize that the office was intended for your colleague in the first place and you had no business fighting with them over that office space. So when you realize that you are wrong, then you just give up so that they get what is rightfully theirs. For avoidance, it is knowing that there's a conflict, but choosing not to deal with it. And this is not a good response to conflict most of the time, because avoiders do not acknowledge or talk about the conflict with the other person. And sometimes they avoid the person altogether. So you see the person and you avoid them. And in an avoidance situation, you would say that neither you nor I satisfy our concerns. So I don't really care what you need. And I don't want to push this because probably, as some people say, I don't have the energy or I don't have the time for this. But it is not always bad, because sometimes you need to avoid conflict, especially when the harm of engaging in the conflict outweighs the potential benefits. So if you feel like engaging in the conflict is going to ruin your well-built reputation over the years in the organization, you might want to just avoid the conflict. Or if you feel like you need time to collect information and cool down, you might avoid the conflict in the beginning so that you go and collect your objective information or calm down and come and deal with it later. And sometimes someone else can be more effective in reaching a solution. So you might want to avoid it and then go and defer to the other person to deal with the issue on your behalf. And then sometimes it's just not necessary. some conflicts are totally unnecessary. It is not important in the big picture. It does not affect your output in the office in any way. It does not affect your output in the field in any way. So you just let it go, because dealing with a conflict that has no importance to you is just a strain on you. And then sometimes when change is not possible or realistic, maybe there's a policy. It is not a good policy. It doesn't help you to work effectively, but you have no way or no means of changing it. Or it's someone's personality. The person is a sanguine, or the person is just melancholic and is always quiet, and you feel like they are too moody. You cannot change that in a day or in a week or even a year. So you avoid those conflicts. Competition assumes that in order for one person to win, the other must lose. So it is like, I have to get what I want. But not only do I get what I want, I have to make sure that you also do not get what you want. And this is like going head to head against the other person and making sure that you get what you need, but it has to be at their expense. So you are seeking to punish them for engaging in conflict with you by making sure that they do not get what they want. And sometimes you need to have some leverage over the other person to be in that kind of competitive conflict resolution situation. So in situations where unpopular actions must be implemented, like there's a policy and all the workers are kicking against it, but that is the policy that will fetch revenue, and revenue is what matters to the organization at that time. The organization or the leadership of the organization might decide that, okay, we must get what we want at all costs, regardless of what you say. And then sometimes when you need to be quick and the decision is paramount, so you have to make a very important decision, you don't have time. There are people who do not agree with it, but you just do not have the time to sit down and dialogue and get them to agree with you. You might assume a competitive resolution style and push for what you want at their expense. And then sometimes when you feel like achieving your goal is the most important thing, which is not always right, because we need to be considerate and we need to think about the group's development and productivity as well. So achieving your goal, if achieving your goal is the only paramount thing to you when it comes to the workplace, then you might want to reconsider. And then collaborating, which is talking through differences to uncover what each person needs rather than what they want. So what they are arguing for, or what the conflict is about, is it what they need or what they want? Sometimes people don't even know what really they need. They just want to push for things that should not matter. So collaborating generates unique solutions that satisfies the needs of both people, so that there's a problem-solving approach that assumes that both people can get their needs met. So you can use the problem-solving method, for example, to judge and then agree on an approach that gives each person what they need and what they require to make the work go on. Okay, so you might say that we discover a unique and creative way to satisfy both of our important concerns. So it doesn't have to be you winning, it doesn't have to be me winning, but it's also not about us getting what we were fighting for initially, but what we really need in that situation. So we use collaboration when relationships and the issues are both important. So if you work in an environment where relationships matter to you, in the department or in the office or in the research team, and the issues are both important, if you are working on a project and you have deadlines and the project cycle is running, yeah, the relationships are important, yes, but the issues are also both very important. So you need to sit down and agree on what is necessary and what is needed at that time. And then where reaching a consensus is paramount, you also want to choose a collaborative approach more than a competitive approach. And then when you need to gain commitment and acceptance for a high quality decision. So if you want to make a decision on a high level, you are the head of a team and you want to make a decision and you need the commitment of your people to work with the new concept you are introducing, then you need to be collaborative about it and have engagements for them to understand that this is what we really need as a department or as an office or an organization. And then finally, compromise is about splitting the difference. So it's a 50-50 thing. So each person gets and gives up a little of what they want. So it is like, let's settle. And it's an attempt to seek a middle ground. So I give up some of my concerns to satisfy you, and you do the same. Sometimes we need to achieve temporary solutions for issues that are complex. So there might be issues that are difficult to deal with, and you may not have a long-term solution initially. But if you need a temporary solution to it, you might engage with the other person. So would you agree to let go of this? I will let go of this so that we can have this environment, or we can have this resource to work with for now. And then when the decision is time sensitive and it's simply not worth fighting over, you want to discuss and compromise. And when you try to collaborate, or somebody has tried to compete and did not win, then you need to come to a compromise. And also when the two parties are of equal power and they are strongly committed to different things, so mutually exclusive goals, two strong people. So we all know people like that within organizations, okay? So they might be people with influence. There are people with influence who might not necessarily be the head of their department, but the head of the department also has that institutional power. So these two people might need to compromise, or the head of department might want to make sure that he or she has engaged this person to come to a compromise before introducing certain things. So in all these strategies that we have talked about, there are certain things that help us to bridge the gap. Because if you are trying to problem solve, or you are trying to collaborate with somebody and you do not communicate effectively, you might not be successful. So let's look at some effective communication tips and some strategies to help us bridge conflict resolution. So we'll look at effective communication and then the mediation process, which could be a way you can take to deal with a conflict if you try all the effective communication and all the problem solving and it's not working. You might also try providing feedback, and you might also try preventing burnout on yourself. So effective communication skills for conflict management include active listening and summarization. It includes assertive speaking, and then it includes asking questions. So active listening does not just mean being present. It means listening with your mind, your body, and your heart. So your mind, you should be focused on the person who is communicating or speaking to you. And then your body should be present. So if the person looks at your body language, if your head is down, or you are looking away, or you are on your phone, then that doesn't qualify as active listening, although you are present. And then you should listen with your heart, because you are listening to understand. You are listening with empathy. And then you try to understand, and not just understand, but to clarify that you understand, you need to summarize what the person said. Okay, so in listening to understand, you want to know what they want, why they want it, and how they feel about it. So in having a discussion with someone about a conflict, The aim is not just to narrate what you did or what the person did and how this person shouted and how this person said that and that led to that. But it is, what is the reason? What do you want? And why did we have this argument? What is the issue we are dealing with? And why do we think this issue is important? And how does it make you feel? Then you want to summarize the key points and the major ideas expressed by the person, including their feelings in their own words. So you need to be concise and leave out the details. If they use expressions about, they use certain adjectives and all that, you want to leave out all those details and go down to the bottom line. And don't add any commentary, no advice, and don't ask questions when you are listening or summarizing or mirroring what they said. The only question you can ask is if you got it right. So after summarizing what they said to you, what they think, why they think it's important, and how it makes them feel, you want to be sure to ask them if you got it right. So we have an example of active listening, and it's the exercise number 3 on our worksheets. I had some polls, but Zoom is saying I'm logged out. So are you able to show the polls?
Okay, so I've tried launching it. I don't know if people have been able to see it.
Okay, so let's launch the one on active listening.
Okay.
Should I stop sharing my screen? Will that help?
I don't think so. Maybe. Let's try that and see.
Okay. So
but I have launched it though. Dear members, have you been able to see the poll that was launched?
Can anyone
Yes.
see the poll?
I saw.
But we don't see any, I don't see anyone selecting anything yet.
Could you try again?
Let me relaunch it.
I could actually see it.
Yeah, we could see it, just that we couldn't comment.
Okay, so is it still showing?
I have relaunched it.
Yes, it is.
They always get the individuals and my sponsors.
Okay, I guess they can see it.
But we can see. Okay, so I'm going to read out the questions and then we can try and answer in the chat box. The essence of the poll was for all of us to see the results, because it's not really about a right or wrong answer. It's about choosing what is the best in what situation. So let me share my screen again. Okay, so for each of these, we will do just the first 3 because of time. We'll do just the first 3. For each of the workplace conversations below, select the response that best represents active listening. So an employee goes to their manager and says, they always get the easy jobs, and my supervisor saves the hard ones for me. As a manager, what do you think is the right response if you have listened actively and you want to summarize and relay it back to the person? What would be your response? Please, let's drop out.
I'll go for the third one.
Okay, so people are saying C. So you feel C says you feel that your supervisor is picking on you and being unfair about the way work is assigned. So can someone explain why you would pick C?
If I was listening to you well, Nana, you said that when you listen actively, the best response isn't to put back a question to the person, maybe asking for something else. So the first one, what evidence do you have for that? Makes it a bit like you're already taking sides with the supervisor.
Yes.
Then the second one, I thought you said earlier that the hard work and easy jobs were equally assigned. I don't think it's really addressing the question the person posed to the manager. It's as if it's also looking like he's taking sides. So the third one comes up clearly, trying to understand the point the employee is making. That's why I go there.
Yes, exactly. Because in repeating or summarizing, you want to make sure you are understanding how the person feels and why the person feels that way and how it's affecting them. Okay, so if you ask what evidence do you have for that, that's a confrontational question, and it's not addressing what they have expressed to you or the grievance they have expressed to you. And referring to past things or what someone said in the past in the presence of an active conflict is also not the best way to go. So I agree with you that C is a good answer. So the second one, the employee says, when I first joined the company, I thought I was going to get somewhere. Well, it's been 5 years and I'm still in the same job. Can we drop our answers in the chat? Do we think it's A, B, or C? No answers?
I'm thinking A.
Okay. So A says, a lot of people are saying A as well, but I see one C. Let's see what the two are. So A says, getting ahead is important to you. You are disappointed with your progress. And then C says, what do you think you should be doing? So if you ask in this situation, what do you think you should be doing? It's like blaming the person for the problem they are reporting. So if the person is saying, when I first joined, I thought I was going to get somewhere, but they've been stuck at the same place for 5 years. It's like you saying you haven't done anything in the 5 years. So what do you think you should be doing? But if you mirror the statement and say getting ahead is important to you, you are disappointed with your progress. That is you seeking to understand what the person is going through. Okay, so I'll leave the next 3 for us. It's on our workbook. We can go through it in our free time. So we'll skip this. It's a video, but we'll skip it. So let's look at assertive speaking. So I mentioned that it's important that we speak assertively after asking questions and summarizing. You want to also be able to communicate assertively if you are in a conflict situation and you need to communicate your emotions or how it's affecting your work or how it's making you feel. Okay, so assertive speaking is a tool for clearly communicating your feelings around a present conflict in a positive, non-threatening way. So we talked about I messages previously, and I messages are simply statements that start with I. So you are not making it about the person. You don't say you do this, you do that, you make me do that, or you always do this. It is I. Okay. And you start by stating how you feel, when what happens, and then the reason you feel that way. So when you say I feel, you describe how you feel with one word. So I feel disrespected, or I feel disregarded, or however it makes you feel. I feel sad. And then when you state your when, it's about stating the problem, the behavior, or the language. So it's not about the person. If you have a video camera showing the action and somebody is displaying anger, that is all you are saying when you raise your voice. You don't go saying when you accuse me of this and that. Okay. And then you state why the behavior produces that feeling in you. So an example is that I feel frustrated when you speak while I'm speaking, because what I'm saying is important and I need to be certain that you heard it. So this is one example of such statements. So we can think about how we can communicate our feelings in this way so that it takes away the condemnation of the other party, and it takes away the impression that we are just venting or we are just complaining. If you are assertive and you are direct in communicating what you feel. Then you also want to ask questions. So positive, genuine questions can help you move on and resolve conflicts and then uncover the mutual interest, because a lot of the time beneath the conflict, there are probably shared interests that you have, and it may be an issue of lack of communication or misunderstanding or some biases that are preventing you from moving on. So the aim of asking the questions is to uncover whether there's a shared interest in this situation. So questions can help us understand the other person's point of view and clarify miscommunications, and also gather more information and uncover the interest or the motivation behind the actions of the other person. So we use open-ended and closed-ended questions, and I'm sure we know what open-ended and closed-ended questions are. But they essentially help us to open up or to elicit more information. And typically an open-ended question will start with what, where, who, why, and how. So you can ask the person to talk more about why they feel that way. So if someone comes to you with an I statement, I feel this when you do that because that, then you can ask them to talk more about why they feel that way. And then you can also ask how they came to that conclusion, or what is most important to them about that situation. If someone comes to you saying that I feel disrespected when you raise your voice because it makes me feel like I don't matter, is it just because the person is seeking validation, or probably you are yelling at the person in front of their subordinates and they feel like you are disregarding them, or you are creating the wrong impression about them? So you want to find out what is most important to them. And then if you do not understand something, use the words that they used and then ask them to explain. So what do you mean when you say you feel disrespected? And then closed-ended questions can be used to gain specific information or to clarify what has been said. So typically they typically begin with is, do, are, should, could, would, and all those questions that are seeking a yes or no answer. So I heard you say this, is that correct? Or will you be willing to do this? The answer is going to be a yes or a no, and that helps you to clarify what you thought you understood. So we'll look at the mediation process, because sometimes we try to deal with conflict on our own. Okay, so we start with a one-to-one. So you try to use all these strategies we've talked about to deal with the conflict on a one-to-one with the person. But sometimes it doesn't work, and you might want to move on and invite an external, a neutral person into the conflict resolution process or the mediation process. So that becomes a 2+1. So it could be inviting your head of department into a conflict with a colleague so that you come up with a solution. Or you could move on if the 2+1 also fails to seek an external mediator or a coach. So there are people who are trained mediators who handle organizational level conflict, or a counselor. In Ghana, we have a lot of counselors. So you might want to seek external help to deal with the situation. And then usually self-reflection precedes a one-to-one. So you want to sit down and make that self-reflection and deal with it. But sometimes you can move from the external mediation back into a self-reflection, and then the cycle goes on and on. And then giving feedback is also an important way of dealing with conflict, or managing or preventing conflict. The manner in which you give feedback can lead to a conflict or can diffuse a conflict. And feedback should be constructive, given with a constructive mindset. Constructive in the sense that you want to achieve something, and destructive meaning that you are seeking to make it about the person or to make the person feel bad for what might genuinely be an honest mistake. So a constructive mindset intends to educate the person, so they might genuinely not know about something or not know how to react in a cultural context, and you might want to educate them. Okay, so in a lot of the examples that we gave, for example, someone whose culture makes them speak in a certain tone, you might want to educate them and give them feedback about how their self-expression also has a negative connotation. Constructive feedback also relates to the work and the problem and not the person. And then it builds on ideas. So you are coming in with an idea, you are not just coming in with a criticism. And then it makes the outcome better. So if the feedback you are giving is just a complaint and it's not contributing anything to the outcome or the productivity of the organization, then that is not constructive. And it is intelligent and thoughtful. So it's important that we sit down and analyze and reflect on the feedback we give to others. A lot of the time we are quick to just blurt out feedback or give unsolicited feedback. If the feedback is unsolicited, you want to sit down and reflect on it and put some thought in it so that when you are communicating it, it is as objective and positive as possible. And then positive feedback generally helps. So it is not supposed to destroy. On the other hand, if you provide feedback by embarrassing your colleagues or displaying how shambolic or how mediocre their work is, or just trying to ridicule them or attacking them, just always pointing out their faults, that is a trigger for conflict. And if you tear down the idea of somebody without even giving them the chance to explain or elaborate, no matter how ridiculous the idea sounds, it's important that you give constructive feedback to help them build it up. And then destructive feedback also makes the person feel worse. If someone makes a mistake and your feedback only makes them feel worse, then that is not positive. It also includes rapid fire. So one accusation or one reprimand after the other. So you are a boss or you are a leader and your subordinate does something wrong and you call them to your office. That is not the time to release a machine gun of feedback or criticism, one rapid fire or the other. You want to give room for the person to listen and respond if possible, and come up with ways to deal with it. And then this is also another concept. It comes from a book called Getting to Yes, and it's one of the ways of going through conflict. It seeks to separate people from problems. So we've talked about separating people all through the conversation. It also seeks to build common interests and not positions. So it is not about being entrenched in one position or the other, but you are looking for the common interest. And then it also features brainstorming and inventing. So the aim of going through this entire process of understanding the person, listening to them and hearing their perspective and asking all questions, this kind of summarizes everything we have talked about. But the entire aim of this is to invent agreements, okay? And you will always want to assume positive, especially in a professional environment. And then preventing burnout in terms of conflict-related burnout. So physical and emotional stresses create unhealthy, intense feelings, creating drain. And conflict is a real stressor for a lot of people. So it's important that we recognize when we are triggered. If micromanaging is a trigger for you, if mistrust or people who are not trustworthy trigger you, you want to be present and recognize anytime you're triggered. And then you want to reverse the emotions. So reverse in the sense that you sit down and reflect, and then you think about how you can get yourself back on track. And that is how you build resilience, so that over time, you may not be happy with it, but you are not going to be displaying anger, and you are not going to try to retaliate or display other destructive conflict behaviors. So we talked about communication already. So to end, I will touch on the last exercise, which is exercise number 4. So we have gone through a lot of issues today. We have talked about the sources of conflict, our conflict responses, and how to create options. So we want to practice how to be conflict competent. And how we are going to do this is to think of a current active conflict we are involved in with a conflict partner. So the conflict partner can be your colleague or your family. And then individually, we want to reflect and consider 2 options and strategies that may work in this situation. So are you going to problem solve? Are you going to use collaborative problem solving? Are you going to use active listening and summarizing and questioning to deal with this? Are you going to use the mediation process to deal with this? We were supposed to do this in another breakout and share back with the group, but it's 6:13. So I will leave us with this to reflect on tonight, and then think about an actual conflict. So don't make up one, because we all have some conflict situation or the other. So think about an actual conflict that perhaps you might have avoided, and then how you are going to deal with it, and then reflect on that, and then let's work to make our workplaces more friendly and enjoyable. So thank you very much. And that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, RD Nana, for your presentation on dealing with workplace conflict. Colleagues, do we have any questions? Please it's either we put them in the chat or you raise your hand and you'll be called, you unmute, and then you'd ask the question. Any questions? No questions? So we are to assume that we are all clear on how going forward we are going to deal with conflicts at our workplaces, and not only at our workplaces, but at least maybe at home or with our colleagues. Okay. So from the comments, thank you, RD Nana, very detailed and practical oriented presentation. Great presentation, RD Nana. Quite an insightful presentation. Thank you, RD Nana. Okay, question. Is it scientifically proven that some characters can never work together?
Something, I think never is a strong word.
Yeah.
I mean, we may have character, personality clashes here and there, but we have to, that is why we have conflict management, and why we have to sometimes collaborate, sometimes allow or avoid or adapt, so you deal with the issues on a case-by-case basis. And if it's the personality of the person, you also want to be objective, because it is not just the person clashing by themselves, you are also clashing with the person. So being objective helps us to look beyond the character flaws of people.
Thank you. Insightful presentation. Thanks, RD Nana. Great. Yes, great presentation, RD Nana. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, if there are no questions, I guess with those of us still on, we can be discussing the last parts you gave us, the last activity. Yeah, so that as people are still on, maybe we could just be sharing that. Okay. Yes.
Okay, so maybe I'll just reopen all the rooms.
Yeah.
So that we
like that. Yeah. People still on.
So I'll reopen all the rooms, and then we work on the fourth one.
People are also leaving quite fast.
Yeah. So maybe 5 minutes, and then we come back.
Okay. Okay, so please, the rooms are open, so we can all join our respective breakout rooms and have some little discussions before we go. Okay, people are actually leaving, so
I think we should just end it.
All right. So thank you, Nana, for the presentation. Yes, it was very insightful listening to you and then reflecting on, well, personality, from my point of view, reflecting on my personality and trying to cast my mind back to some of the situations I've experienced at selves, and then know how to deal with such things. Okay, I see that some people have joined some of the rooms. Yeah, but
I close them.
Yeah, it's fine.
They'll close in a minute.
Yes. Yes. Please, those of us online, the attendance form was posted in the chat. I'll post it again. If you haven't filled it out, kindly do so. Thank you. Okay. All right, so I think we can end our CPD for today. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining today's CPD. Thank you, RD Nana, for the presentation, and thank you for the worksheet you gave. We are going to use it in our various workplaces to ensure that we manage our relations at work. So thank you and have a good evening, everyone. So I'll still be online for those of us who haven't signed in the attendance to do so. Thank you.